I am laughing. I want you to hold that for a moment, because I need you to understand what that means. Not a polite laugh, not the careful, controlled sound I had spent 3 years perfecting, the one that said, I am appropriate and pleasant and exactly what you need me to be. I mean a real laugh, the kind that starts somewhere in your chest before your brain has any say in it. The kind that makes your eyes water and your hand reach out and grab the nearest solid thing because your body suddenly needs an anchor. The nearest solid thing happens to be the arm of a king. We are in the garden, third night of the summit. Jasmine in the air and moonlight on the stone, and Caleb Dreven is looking at me like I just said the most extraordinary thing he has ever heard. And I am trying to remember, genuinely trying, the last time anyone looked at me that way. I cannot remember. But I remember other things. I remember a sitting room, a door not quite closed. I remember standing in a corridor I was never supposed to be standing in, holding my own breath, listening to Wesley Radin tell his father in that calm, measured voice of his, the voice he used for trade agreements and weather reports, and apparently also for this, that I was not enough, that the arrangement needed to end, that he was building something and I did not fit inside it. I remember the 11 seconds after. I counted them. I want you to know that. I stood in that corridor and I counted every single one, and then I turned around and walked away without making a sound. I did not slam a door. I did not let him hear me cry. I did not make it difficult for him in any way. Because even then, even in that moment, with his words still sitting on my chest like something heavy and permanent, I did not want to embarrass him. That is the thing I keep coming back to, not what he said, what I did after. But that is not where we are right now. Right now, I am in a garden, and I am laughing, and the jasmine smells extraordinary, and everything is, for approximately 30 more seconds, perfectly, dangerously fine. And then I hear the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, the sound of someone who has been standing very still for a long time and has just made a decision that cannot be unmade. My wolf knows before I do. She always knows. She goes absolutely rigid inside my chest and sends one word up through my blood like a flare fired into a dark sky. Him. I stop laughing. Let me tell you what being groomed looks like from the inside. It does not look like a cage. That is the first thing they never tell you. A cage you can see, a cage you can press your hands against and feel the bars and say, here, this is where my freedom ends. Grooming does not give you that. Grooming looks like preparation. It looks like care. It looks like a succession of women with kind eyes and firm voices teaching you how to walk into a room and how to leave one, how to speak to alphas 3 ranks above you without shrinking, how to arrange your face when someone says something that hurts so that the hurt is yours alone. I was 16 when it started. Wesley Radin was 19 and already alpha king in everything but the formal ceremony, and somewhere in the machinery of pack politics, our names had been placed beside each other on a document, and the thing was done. I was not consulted. Neither was he. I told myself this meant we were equal. I was wrong about that, as I would be wrong about many things. But I was 16, and I believed in fate, the way you believe in it before fate has had the opportunity to show you its actual personality. They taught me languages first, 3 of them, then border law and trade protocol, and the exhausting art of being interesting without being threatening. They taught me which questions to ask and which ones to swallow. They taught me how to make powerful people feel seen without making them feel watched. I was an excellent student. I want you to know that. Whatever else I tell you tonight, I was extraordinarily good at becoming what they asked me to become. The thing no one mentioned was that Wesley Radin was also extraordinary. Not in the way I had imagined when I was 16, and I had allowed myself the small private luxury of hoping. He was extraordinary in a way that was much harder to survive than disappointment would have been. Wesley Radin was genuinely, consistently, remarkably kind. Not performed kindness, not the kind that powerful men deploy like currency when they need something. Real kindness, the kind that costs something. He remembered the names of every servant in the Northern Throne's household, every single one. I watched him stop in the middle of a formal procession once. Council members, visiting dignitaries, the whole weight of power moving behind him, because an elderly Omega woman had dropped her basket in the road. He helped her pick up every item himself, bent down in his formal coat on the cobblestones, and picked up her bread and her herbs and her folded cloth, and handed them back one by one, while his council stood behind him in stunned, pained silence. That was Wesley Radin. That was the man I had been prepared for. He provided land allocations to the widows of fallen pack soldiers before the burial fires went cold. He solicited Lady Petra Halwin's read on Eastern trade routes in open council and listened, actually listened when she answered. He complimented Countess Idris Vane's border proposal in front of 12 senior alphas and meant every word. He was everything I had been promised he could be. He simply was not those things with me. With me, he was warm in private and absent in public. He would hand me a cup of tea in an empty room because he had noticed I was cold. Just noticed, without being asked. He would pause beside me at a corridor window and point out something in the courtyard below that he thought I would find interesting. Small moments, real ones, just enough to make me believe the larger thing was coming, just enough to ensure I never quite stopped waiting for it. In front of others, I was invisible. Not ignored. Ignored would have been something I could name, something I could hold up and say, look, here is the proof. Invisible is different. Invisible is being simply, quietly, consistently overlooked. His eyes moved past me in rooms, the way eyes move past furniture. Not with contempt, just with the total absence of the thing that makes a person real to you. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself this was the arrangement finding its shape. I told myself that 3 years was not very long when you were building a life. I told myself a great many things. I was very creative. And then came the sitting room. His father's sitting room, to be precise. I was walking past. The door was not fully closed, not open enough that anyone would call it open, just not fully closed, that specific width of carelessness that changes everything. I heard Lord Aldrich's voice first, low and formal, and then I heard Wesley. Calm, measured, the voice he used for decisions that had already been made and simply needed to be communicated. She is a good woman, Father. She will make someone a fine mate, but I am building something that requires more than goodness. She is not enough for the life I am building. Release the arrangement. 7 seconds of silence from Lord Aldrich. And then 11 seconds of me. I counted them. I stood in that corridor outside a door that was not quite closed, and I counted 11 seconds of my own heartbeat, and I did not make a sound. I did not push the door open. I did not let my breath catch loud enough for anyone inside to hear. I did not give him the discomfort of knowing I was there. Because even then, I did not want to embarrass him. I walked back to my chambers. I sat on the edge of my bed. I looked at the wall for what I later estimated was approximately 40 minutes. I did not cry. I want you to hold on to that. I did not cry because crying would have meant I was surprised, and somewhere beneath all my careful hoping, beneath 3 years of patient, beautifully executed waiting, I was not surprised. And that was the thing that broke something in me that the words themselves had not quite managed to break. Not his verdict, my lack of surprise at it. I packed 1 bag. Then I walked down the hall to Lady Vessa Thornwick's chambers, and I knocked on her door, and when she opened it and looked at my face, just looked, she did not ask, she was too clever to ask, I said 4 words. Does your offer stand? She stepped back from the door to let me in. And 3 days later, I would walk into the grand solstice celebration, wearing a dress I had chosen myself. A woman with nothing left to lose, and absolutely nothing left to protect him from. Here is something nobody tells you about power. It has paperwork. Kingdoms run on documents, treaties, designations, formal titles, companion registrations, a vast written architecture that powerful men construct carefully and then stop paying attention to the moment it stops being useful to them. Wesley Raiden built that framework. He knew every clause, every precedent, every procedural mechanism in Northern Pack Law better than most alphas knew their own names. He simply forgot about one. During the grooming years, Lady Vessa Thornwick had served as my formal mentor, a designation that carried, under Elder Pack Law, a specific and binding provision. A named mentor retained the right to register their charge as official summit companion for any royal gathering until that designation was formally dissolved by written release. Both parties had to sign, both parties had to file. Wesley had never filed, not out of malice, out of the carelessness of a man who had already decided the matter was concluded and therefore stopped thinking about it entirely. The morning of departure, Aldous Cren knocked on Wesley's chamber door before dawn. He entered, set the formal notification on Wesley's desk, stood back, and watched his king read it. Then watched him read it again. Lady Vessa Thornwick hereby invokes companion provision number 7 of the Elder Summit Accord, registering Susan Vale as official companion for the Grand Solstice celebration. Any denial will be recorded as a violation of Elder Pack Law and submitted to the full Territorial Council for review. Wesley looked up at Aldous. Aldous looked back. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say. Every Alpha King from 5 territories was arriving at a summit Wesley was hosting. Denying a matriarch's formal companion request, on record, in writing, would make him look weak before the first glass of wine was poured. He had no move. He had built the rules himself, and now they were holding the door open for me from the inside. Lady Vessa found me an hour before departure. She set a package on my bed, the amber dress wrapped in brown paper, sat down and looked at me steadily. You were groomed to make yourself small enough to fit inside someone else's life. I want to see what size you actually are. The carriage ride took 4 hours. I spent most of it watching the landscape change, trying to locate the feeling in my chest, that unfamiliar, slightly terrifying sensation that I eventually identified, somewhere around the 3rd hour, as having nothing left to perform. We arrived as the sun was setting. The grand solstice celebration blazed with 1,000 candles behind enormous iron doors, and the herald announced our names into a room full of kings. And I walked in on Lady Vessa's arm in my amber dress, and I did not look for Wesley Raiden, not once. Not when the room shifted. Not when I felt the quality of silence that moves through a crowd when something unexpected has entered it. Not when Lady Vessa's hand tightened slightly on my arm in the way that meant, "Steady, he has seen you." I looked straight ahead. I took a glass of wine from a passing tray, and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, I am in his house, through his door, under his rules, and he cannot move me. What I did not know was that across the room, near the eastern entrance, a man I had never met was watching me walk in, and he was already deciding something. I want to tell you about the specific cruelty of watching someone be everything you were promised they could be, for everyone in the room except you. Wesley worked that first evening like a man born for exactly this. He moved through the celebration with the grace of someone who understands that power is not announced, it is demonstrated, quietly, in the accumulated weight of 1,000 small, genuine moments. He remembered names, Not just the alphas and dignitaries. The server who had refilled his glass twice. He asked her name on the third visit and used it when he thanked her. He drew Lady Vessa into a conversation about northern border history and listened with the focused attention of a man who understood that wisdom required the courtesy of actual silence to be heard. She laughed twice. I have known Lady Vessa Thornwick for 3 years, and I have never once heard her laugh at a summit. He asked Lady Petra Halwyn her read on Eastern trade routes, and then, this is the part that required me to take a slow breath, he took notes, actual notes, on the small card he kept in his inner pocket, the one reserved for things he actually intended to remember. And Countess Idris Vane's border proposal. He complimented it with such specific detail that she visibly recalibrated her entire estimation of the evening. I watched her spine straighten. I watched her decide in real time that she had underestimated this king. I knew that feeling intimately. 3 hours. I stood at the edge of that room for 3 hours, holding my wine, maintaining my composure, performing the specific calm of a woman who is absolutely fine. And Wesley Raiden did not speak to me once. Not once. I need you to understand what I am not saying. I am not saying he was cruel. I am not saying he sneered or dismissed me or made a single visible gesture of contempt. That would have been easier. Contempt gives you something to push against. What he gave me was nothing. The practiced absolute nothing of a man who had decided someone did not exist in a room and had become so accomplished at that decision it no longer required effort. I catalogued it quietly, precisely, without letting any of it show. Lady Petra Halwyn, noted. Countess Idris Vane, noted. The server whose name he learned, noted. Susan Vale, 3 hours, same room, nothing. I set down my glass. I straightened the front of my dress with both hands, slowly, the way you straighten something when your body needs something to do while your mind files things away. Then I walked toward the edge of the room, unhurried, the way I had been taught to exit spaces without drawing attention. Evidence, I told myself, just evidence. File it somewhere useful. What I was less practiced at was the sensation of being watched by someone else entirely. Tall, still, gray eyes steady as foundations. His attention moving between Wesley and me with the quiet focus of someone solving an equation. I looked away before he could catch me looking. Old habit. But I felt his gaze stay. What I did not know was what was happening above me at that exact moment. Wesley Raiden stood alone on the upper terrace. The celebration glittered below. He was very still in the way that men are still when they are working hard at something internal. Aldous Kren appeared beside him, said nothing for a long moment, then, quietly, "She is here." Wesley said nothing. I assumed she would cause a scene. Nothing. "She hasn't looked at you once." A pause that lasted long enough to mean something. "I thought you should know that." Aldous left. Wesley stayed on that terrace for a very long time. He was not yet dressed when they arrived. That is the detail I think about now, that Calum's 3 most senior advisers were in his chambers before he had finished buttoning his coat, which means they had been awake long enough before dawn to have already argued with each other and arrived at a unified position. That takes time. That takes the specific collective alarm of people who have watched their king notice something and recognized the look on his face. Fabian Drest spoke first. He always spoke first. He laid it out without preamble. The eastern reaches sat on a fault line, a deep geological fracture that shifted every 3rd winter with enough force to crack stone foundations throughout the territory. Veilstone was the only mineral dense enough to reinforce eastern walls against that movement. It existed in quantity in exactly 2 places: Northern Territory mines and Western ridge deposits. Without the Grand Solstice Treaty's Veilstone clause, in 18 months the eastern wall would begin to fail. Not weaken, fail. The wall standing between 3 border villages and the hollow wilds, the bridges, the watchtowers, the foundations of buildings where people slept. Sarah Vell set down her document. She carries his mark in the eyes of every delegate at this summit. Pursuing her is not a romantic gesture. It is a political declaration. And we cannot afford the war that declaration invites. The room was quiet. Calum finished buttoning his coat. He looked at Orrin Fatch, who had said nothing, who always said nothing until the moment arrived for the one thing that needed to be said. Orrin looked back steadily, then as if reporting a simple fact. She was laughing. Favian drew breath to respond. I have attended 14 summits, Orrin continued, unhurried. I have watched kings collect women the way they collect treaties, for utility, for display, for leverage. I have watched women perform contentment in rooms designed to require it. I have never seen a woman laugh in a political corridor like no one was watching, like she forgot just for a moment that she was supposed to be something for someone. I simply thought it worth noting. He picked up his cup. Calum looked at Favian. Find another angle in the treaty. You have until the closing ceremony. He left before Favian could answer. Behind him, 3 advisers sat with the Veilstone numbers and the weight of a king who had just made a decision that was going to cost all of them something significant. Favian stared at the door. Sarah picked up her document. Orrin finished his cup and said to no one in particular, she was laughing. I had slipped away from the second evening's banquet into a side corridor to breathe. Cool stone, old air, the specific quiet of a place where nobody important was watching. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. I heard footsteps. Unhurried, deliberate, the sound of someone who had decided in advance that they belonged wherever they were going. I opened my eyes. He was already sitting on the stone bench across from me, not standing over me, not performing the entrance, just sitting, like we had an arrangement to meet here, and he was simply keeping it. Gray eyes, the same ones from across the hall the night before. I was not lost, I said, because I needed to establish that immediately. I know, he said. Neither was I. I watched you navigate that room tonight. You were invisible on purpose. You are very good at it." He looked at me with the steady attention of someone reading something carefully. "I think that is a skill you were taught, not born with. I am curious what you are like when you are not performing it." I should have been careful. I had been trained to be careful. 3 years of careful in my recent history, and it had served me extraordinarily well, in the sense that it had kept me utterly safe from anything resembling an actual human moment. I was so tired of being careful, so I answered him, honestly, and then he answered me. And then I said something about the summit's Eastern trade proposals that was somewhat more pointed than diplomatic, and something shifted in his expression, not surprise, more like confirmation. And he laughed, and then I laughed, not the careful kind, the real kind, the kind that came from somewhere I had forgotten I still had access to. The kind that made me press my hand over my mouth a half-second too late. And when I looked up, he was watching me with an expression I did not have immediate language for, but that felt, terrifyingly, like being seen. "There," he said quietly, "there you are." I did not know what he had walked away from to be sitting there. I did not know about Fabian's numbers, or Sarah's document, or Oren's quiet testimony. I did not know that somewhere above us, Fabian dressed was at a writing desk, reworking treaty language, with the focus of a man covering for a king who had chosen a laughing woman over a mineral agreement that kept walls standing and villages safe. I only knew that he had asked what I thought, and listened, like the answer mattered. I walked back to my chambers that night, with my heart doing something irregular, and my head doing its very best to explain it away, and stopped in the doorway, because there was a folded note on my pillow. No signature, one line, in a handwriting I recognized immediately. The handwriting I had watched sign documents and council decisions for 3 years without ever writing a single word to me. I picked it up. I read it. And everything I thought I understood about the next 24 hours rearranged itself completely. I never told you what was in the note. I am going to make you wait a little longer for that. Not to be cruel, because the note matters most after you understand what the third afternoon gave me first. Lady Vessa knocked the way she did everything, with the complete authority of a woman who has decided that hesitation is a form of dishonesty. She came in, she sat down. She did not ask how I had slept or whether I had eaten. She looked at me directly and said, "Calum Dreven came to find you last night, knowing his kingdom's Veilstone Treaty was on the table, knowing the political cost, knowing exactly what pursuit would look like to every delegate in this room. He went anyway." "I am not telling you what to do with that," Vessa continued. "I am telling you that a man who makes that choice, with full information, with everything at stake, has already answered the question you have been afraid to ask." I knew which question she meant. I had been not asking it for 3 years. What do I want? Lady Vessa stood, smoothed her dress, looked at me one final time. "You were groomed to wait for permission,"
Consider this yours." She left. I sat with it for a long time. The permission, the weight of it, the specific, terrifying freedom of being handed something you had convinced yourself you were not allowed to reach for. Then I read the note again. Wesley's handwriting. One line. "I am asking you not to do something irreversible before we have spoken." I folded it, put it in the drawer beside my bed, put on my coat, and walked down to the garden. The garden was moonlit and cool, and smelled like jasmine and old stone, and the specific silence of a place where no one is performing anything. I did not plan to find Calum there. I think he did not entirely plan to find me. We arrived at the same stone path from different directions and stopped, and the moment had a quality of inevitability that I recognized from the corridor the night before. We sat. We talked. Not about the summit, not about anything that required either of us to be a title instead of a person. He told me what he saw when I looked at me. Not potential, not usefulness, not a political asset or a problem to be elegantly managed. He was specific in the way precise people are specific. He named things I had not known anyone had noticed. The way I listened before I spoke. The way my invisibility in that first evening's room was its own kind of extraordinary, because it meant I had been doing something very difficult for a very long time and making it look like nothing. "I see you," he said, simply, without performance. Not the version shaped for someone else's life. You, whatever size that actually is. Lady Vess's words in his mouth without either of them knowing it.
Something opened in my chest. Not painfully, the way a window opens in a room that has been closed too long. The almost involuntary relief of air getting in. He asked me to come with him to the eastern reaches, to be his queen, to build something that had never existed before, that would need to be designed from the beginning by someone who understood both the weight of power and the cost of being invisible inside it. He said he wanted that someone to be me. Then he kissed me. I want to tell you exactly what happened in the moment before I kissed him back, because it is the most important moment in this entire story. There was a half-second, a single breath of space where I could have pulled back, could have said, I need time, I need to think, I need to be careful. All the things I had been trained to say, all the careful, measured things that had served me so well for 3 years while I waited for a man who was deciding in private that I was not enough. In that half-second, I found something I had not known I still had access to. I found what I wanted. Not what I was supposed to want, not what had been assigned to me, not what was strategic or sensible or safe. What I, Susan Vale, standing in a moonlit garden with a king waiting with complete patience for me to decide, actually, genuinely, for myself, wanted. And so I kissed him back. Not for Wesley, not as a statement, not as revenge or performance or proof of anything, because I wanted to. And then I heard the footsteps. My wolf knew first. She went rigid in my chest and sent that single word up through my blood like a flare. Him. I turned around.
Wesley Raiden was standing 10 feet away on the garden path. His hands were shaking. His eyes were gold, not the warm, measured brown I had catalogued across 3 years of rooms and corridors and private moments that cost me everything. Gold. Completely gold. His wolf so far forward there was almost no Wesley left behind them. The sound he made was not a human sound. His hand closed around my wrist. He did not look at Calum. Calum rose slowly from the bench behind me. Every dignitary on the terrace above had gone completely, utterly silent. Wesley looked only at me. And then he said my name. Just my name. One word. Not a question, not a command. My name. In a voice I had never once heard from him in 3 years. Wrecked and certain, all at once. Like a man saying the only true thing he had left. Inside the celebration, the music was still playing. In approximately 30 seconds, someone on that terrace was going to go inside and tell someone else what they had witnessed in the garden below. And then every king, every alpha, every delegate at the Grand Solstice celebration was going to know that Wesley Raiden had just put his hand on a woman he had discarded. In front of the king she had just kissed. I looked at his hand around my wrist. I looked at his gold eyes. I looked at the shaking that had moved from his hands up through his whole frame, the earthquake of a man whose carefully constructed world had just cracked along every fault line simultaneously. And then, very quietly, so that only he could hear, I said his name back, not with tenderness, with the absolute calm of a woman who has just realized she has been waiting in the wrong direction her entire life. Let go of my wrist, Wesley. He did not let go. I want to tell you something about the walk through the celebration. It was not what you are imagining. He did not drag me. I need you to understand that clearly, because the distinction matters enormously. Wesley Raiden put his hand on my wrist in that garden, and I made a decision, not under pressure, not in fear. I made a clear-eyed decision that I wanted to be in whatever room this was heading toward. I wanted this conversation. I had been waiting for it, in one form or another, for 3 years. So I walked, beside him, through the garden gate and into the celebration hall. Every single eye in that room found us within 4 seconds and did not look away. The music did not stop, but it changed quality somehow, became something people were generating with their hands while their attention was entirely somewhere else. 300 wolves tracking 2 people crossing a room. I kept my chin level. I kept my pace steady. I did not look at the faces turning toward us. I already knew what they were seeing. The discarded mate and the king who had discarded her, walking together in his own celebration, and not a single person in that room knowing what it meant, including, at that precise moment, me. Behind us in the garden, Calum had not followed. I knew this without looking. I knew it because Calum Dreven was a man who understood the difference between a moment that required his presence and a moment that required his absence. Orrin Thatch had appeared beside him within 30 seconds, had simply materialized out of the evening like a man who had been anticipating exactly this, and stood there in silence. And that silence had been, by Calum's own account, the most useful thing anyone offered him that entire night. Wesley opened the door to a private meeting room off the eastern corridor. He closed it behind us.
And then we were alone for the first time in 3 years, without the weight of performance around us. No counsel. No servants, no visiting dignitaries providing the comfortable distance of an audience. Just him and me, and everything that had been sitting in the space between us pretending to be nothing. His hands were still shaking. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had studied for 3 years. He was not the king from the sitting room right now. That man, composed, measured, making clean decisions about inconvenient arrangements, had been replaced by someone undone. Someone whose wolf had dragged the truth up from wherever he buried it and left it in the middle of the floor and was refusing, absolutely refusing to let him put it back. I let the silence sit. Then I said it. You told your father I wasn't enough for the life you're building. My voice was very calm. I had not planned the calm. It arrived on its own, the way composure arrives when you have finally stopped using it to protect someone else and started using it for yourself. I need you to say that again, right now, to my face. He tried. I watched him try, watched the sentence form somewhere behind his eyes and travel toward his mouth and stop, watched him draw breath and try again and stop again. His wolf was an almost visible presence in the room, absolutely unwilling to participate in the repetition of the thing that had brought them both here. I did not help him. I have been waiting my entire life. I am extraordinarily good at it. The difference is that every other time I waited, it was for him. This time, the waiting had edges and purpose, and I was not going to soften it by a single second. What came out instead was everything. Not in a flood. It came out the way a structural wall comes apart, not all at once, but in sequence, one load-bearing truth at a time, each one making the next inevitable. His father first, not as excuse, he was precise about that, and I respected the precision, even as it cost me to hear it. He had watched his father love his mother completely, watched that love become the exact mechanism his father's enemies used to move him off his principles. He had decided at 17 years old. 17, I kept returning to that number. He would be kind. He would be generous. He would be everything a good king should be. but he would not need anyone. The 3 years of careful distance. He said it directly, said that what he had told himself was protection had been, he understood now, saying it out loud for the first time, cowardice. A word he did not soften, did not qualify, did not surround with explanation. Just the word itself, sitting in the room between us, taking up exactly the space it deserved. The private warmth, the tea in empty corridors, the window and the courtyard below. He had not been able to stop entirely, and he had told himself those small moments were harmless. They were not harmless. They were the contradiction of everything he had decided. And then, quietly, looking at the floor, in a voice I had to hold myself very still to hear, "The morning after I spoke to my father, you walked past me in the eastern corridor. Something had gone very quiet inside you. I noticed. I told myself it was for the best. I knew it wasn't. The flood was already inside," he said finally, still looking at the floor. "I knew. I think I knew for a long time. I kept building anyway. I stood there and I let it land, all of it, every word. I did not cry. I did not reach for him. I could feel the pull of it. 3 years of wanting this man's warmth aimed directly at me, and here it finally was, the full, undefended thing, standing 6 feet away with shaking hands, and gold slowly fading back to brown in his eyes. I could feel exactly how easy it would be to cross that distance. I did not cross it, because some doors once closed require more than honesty to reopen. Because I knew and I built anyway was the truest thing he had said, and also the thing I needed to sit with in my own time, without his presence in the room making the decision for me. Because I respected him enough, finally, in this room, to refuse to make it easy. I waited until I was certain he had finished. Then I looked at him directly, this man who had just handed me the most honest version of himself he had ever offered anyone, and I said, "Thank you for saying it." I opened the door. I walked through it. And I stopped. Because I had just remembered something. The note. "I am asking you not to do something irreversible before we have spoken." We had spoken, and I still did not know, standing in that corridor with the celebration noise washing over me, and 2 kings somewhere in this building, and Calem's hand still a memory on my face. I still did not know what irreversible meant. For me, what I wanted, what size I actually was. And in approximately 30 seconds, I was going to walk back into that celebration, and every single person in it was going to watch me do it. And the choice I made was going to tell all 300 of them, and me, exactly who Susan Vale had decided to become. I stood in the corridor. I breathed. I did not count the seconds. That was the first difference. And then I walked. I want to tell you what it feels like to walk into a room as yourself for the first time. It feels like the first step after sitting for so long, your legs have forgotten what they are for. Slightly uncertain, slightly unsteady, like your body is recalibrating to a weight it has never actually carried before. The specific, unfamiliar weight of not performing anything for anyone. I pushed open the doors to the grand solstice celebration, and I walked in alone. Not with Wesley, not on Calum's arm, not positioned carefully at Lady Vess's side as her named companion. Alone. In my amber dress, with my chin level and my hands not shaking, and the full, undefended fact of me walking into a room that had spent 3 days deciding what I was. The room noticed. Of course it noticed. 300 wolves trained from birth to read entrances the way other people read weather. Every head turning, every conversation pausing, every carefully composed face performing the specific work of appearing not to stare, while staring completely. I felt it the way you feel weather, not as threat, as information. They were trying to read me. I let them look. Lady Vessa was at the edge of the room, exactly where I knew she would be. She did not ask what happened in the private room. She did not ask what happened in the garden. She did not ask about the note, or Wesley's hands, or Calum's eyes, or the corridor where I had stood and breathed and not counted the seconds. She simply held out her hand, the way you hold a door open for someone who has been standing in the rain, not pulling them through, not pushing, just open. The rest is theirs. I took it. We stood together at the edge of the celebration, and I let myself be seen. Not performed, not arranged, not optimized for anyone's approval or comfort. Just seen. Wesley was on the far side of the hall. I found him the way you find things you have been trained to locate, automatically before you decide to look. He was standing near the northern archway, and he was not moving toward me. I want you to understand what that cost him. His wolf was still present in the set of his shoulders, in the stillness of a man holding himself in place against something that wants very badly to move. But he was holding. He had understood something in that private room. The distinction between his wolf's certainty and my choice, and that the second one was the only one that had ever actually mattered. He looked like a man learning something he should have known years ago. The knowledge was arriving on his face slowly, the way winter light arrives, pale and precise, and slightly too late to warm anything. I noted it, without satisfaction, without sorrow, just as information, just as true, the way you note weather after you have already come inside. Calum was near the eastern doors. Fabian dressed was beside him with a sheaf of documents thick enough to suggest a man who had not slept and had opinions about that. Calum was not looking at the documents. He was looking at me, with the same steady gray attention he had aimed at me across the first evening's celebration, except now it carried something additional, the weight of what he had chosen. The Veilstone numbers, and Sarah's document, and Oren's empty cup, and Fabian's midnight treaty work, all of it visible in how he looked at me across that room. When I met his eyes, he did something small, not a smile, something quieter than a smile, an acknowledgement. I see you. I am still here. There is no urgency.
I held his gaze for a moment. Then I looked away, not because I had decided anything, because I had decided I did not need to decide tonight, because Lady Vessa's hand was in mine, and my feet were moving at my own pace, and the room was full of kings, and I was, for the first time in my life, not angling myself toward any of them.
I am talking to you now, directly. The way I open this story, close, like something I have not told anyone else. I do not look back to see if anyone is watching me go. I know what I found in that garden. I know what I heard in that private room. I know what Lady Vessa's hand feels like in mine, and I know what my own feet feel like moving at my own pace towards something I have not yet named. I do not have all the answers, but I have something I have never had before. I have the questions, and they belong to me. And tomorrow morning, when the summit's final day begins, when the Veilstone Treaty goes to the table, and Wesley Raiden must sit across from Calum Dreven in formal negotiation, and every delegate in 5 territories watches 2 kings pretend to be nothing but political entities with competing interests, tomorrow morning, Lady Vessa tells me there is one more thing, a formal proceeding, my name on a document, a decision that cannot be made by anyone in that room except me. I press my hand over the folded note still in my pocket. Wesley's handwriting. One line. I am asking you not to do something irreversible. And I think about what irreversible means. And I think about what I want. And for the first time in my life, the answer that comes back is not someone else's name. It is mine.